The next speaker will be providing insights into what Canadian residents are looking for and will pay for in their current and future rentals. Powered by Yardi, and for the 4th year in a row, we are eager to present the findings of what was discovered this year. Amy Erixon, Principal and Managing Director, Investments, Avison Young, founded and heads the firm's global investment management practice, which is active across all major and select property types in Canada, the US, Mexico, Germany, and the UK on behalf of institutional investors. Our thanks to GWL Real Estate Advisors for sponsoring this presentation. Please join me in welcoming Amy to the stage.
We've got an awful lot of ground to cover, and I'll tell you what won't cause the next recession, and that is the Canadian apartment market. Are there any first-timers here for this survey? Oh, just a few. Okay, well, so this is our 4th time running through this survey, and there's been a lot of developments, both in addition to the help that we got from the industry. We've had some suggestions from residents as well to how to tinker the questions so it gets at the heart of what's happening in the Canadian apartment market. So let's get right into it. So this information we find is very valuable. And the feedback we've been getting from owners in the market and from the tenants themselves suggests that that is extremely poignant. We're getting both positioning data, and with the rise in starts, I think that's really helpful. But we're also getting feedback from the tenants that it makes them feel more valued. We've been increasingly looking at soft data, which is how the tenants are reacting to tweaks in management techniques and tweaks in the programming at the property level, and that information I hope you'll find as valuable as we do. Also, because we use the same Excel basis for the dashboard this year, we have year-over-year data that is more refined than in prior years. So this year we were able to get a huge increase in the number of responses. We also got, as we were aiming for, a significant increase in condo respondents. Where we haven't made penetration that we're interested in pursuing is in the student housing information, which we see as a leading indicator because those people coming out of school hopefully will have the means to enter the rental market. So here's a chart of how the growth in respondents have been proceeding year over year. You can see it's a good steady trend up. And as I said, the feedback from the respondents themselves has been the most enthusiastic. We continue to refine the dashboard, provide more granularity and ability for the users to tinker with all of the variables in conjunction with one another. So if you want to really drill down on a specific submarket and a specific age classification, or what are the amenity priorities of people with children, again, in a specific region or location, and what they're willing to pay more for, that information is readily available with just the click of a button. Also, we fill the survey, we remove questions that didn't seem to generate a lot of granularity in the information base, and we add questions that owners who are participating in distributing the survey have specifically asked us to include. So that could be as granular, and in fact, this is a question that we asked this year. Do you have a preference for hardwood floors, carpet, or composite? Those are the kinds of levels of questions that people actually respond to and whether they'll pay more for those types of amenities. Here's a sample list of the kinds of questions that we added this year that were new from years prior. So we were able to get a lot more information. We had more than 120 different categories of information and 93 different amenities and features that we drilled down on in terms of how much people value them and how much they would pay for them. We also added questions, as we have each year, on technology, automation. This year we introduced cannabis and actually quite a bit of granular information about smoking characteristics. And we're also starting to look at co-living and more features that relate to the sharing economy. So moving along, as in prior years, we have been getting an improved response outside of the GTA, but still a third of all the respondents are in the Greater Toronto Area. A third are in the next 8 major metros. Actually, Halifax dropped off of this list because the sample size grew by such a large amount. There was still a good amount of responses from Halifax, but not enough to meet this 3% threshold, and a third are outside of the metro area. So it's getting increasingly characteristic of the population at large. By far, the overwhelming type of rental was a building that's been up for more than 15 years. That was 60% of the sample space. As I mentioned, we had an increase in condos this year. We also had some significant new respondents from newer construction, and there's some interesting segmentation about how people feel about that. As you can see, most of the condo stock was in Vancouver and in Calgary. Really, the West represented the greatest penetration in terms of condo respondents, and the West also represented the largest increase in the new building population. So here we're presenting the information year over year so that you get a handle on how things are changing, and I'd say the biggest takeaway from this slide is that the market is very stable. We are seeing an increase in the number of young people finally able to afford their own place, moving out of mom and dad's basement. And also in those figures, you see a rise in the number of children that are in apartment units. The income levels are pretty attractive, generally speaking. People are employed and they're making over $50,000 a year. I'm going to continue here. We have a growing affordability issue. I know that there's some doubts about whether that's real. It's real, and I'm going to get to that shortly here. So you can see the preponderance of renters are between 30 and 50, and you can see that there has been a little tick up in the youth able to afford their own units and a little tick down from a percentage basis of the older renters. This year we found that older renters were more comfortable financially than in prior years, but the younger renters are less comfortable financially than in prior years. So, surprising findings. This year, the two-bedroom composition of the marketplace rose quite a bit. That's good news because it's still showing up in the survey that people want more bedrooms and they're not able to find them. Of those people renting two bedrooms, almost all of them have just one bathroom, and this was the number one feature that people want to see is at least an additional powder room, if not a full bath for each of the bedrooms. Now, 71% have dependents. That's of people who have dependents, that almost 3/4 of them had dependents that were children. Last year, the results were 50% of the people who were supporting dependents had children under the age of 20. 45% under the age of 10, that's a tick up of about 4 percentile. That's, I think, indicative of the younger people moving into rental apartments. So the big feature this year is really washers and dryers. And washers and dryers, for sure, have to have them in the building, but it's becoming a must-have in the unit. That's an expensive retrofit if you didn't plumb for that initially, but as you'll see as we go through the rankings of all of the different amenities, that's really the one that people need to have and won't rent without. So, new findings. So here we go, affordability. Now, I don't know if these numbers are as surprising to you as they were to me, but this is bad news. I mean, the guidelines are to pay a third of your income in rent, and we're well over that in all of our major areas. Provincially, you can't even live in Nunavut at that level. And these are average numbers, and this is what the tenants themselves were reporting in terms of the percentage of their income that they're forking over for rent. So this is a problem. This is a real problem. And it's a problem that needs to get solved, as we all know, by increased supply. So while while Stats Canada might be suggesting that we're oversupplied, I don't think that the numbers back that up. So here's where you see the age breakdowns. The dark blue are the young renters. You can see in Toronto, that number is pushing 50%. Now in Toronto, you have the option of living downtown and forking over a huge percentage of your income for rent and not owning a car and making other types of sacrifices in order to live where you want. But that's an awful big number. That looks right in line with New York and San Francisco and the other most expensive regions in the world. So in a break from prior years, a majority of people are not worried that if they're in a condo that owner is planning to sell anytime soon, they don't see a run on the condo market. It is really the amenity package that attract people to condos as opposed to purpose-built rentals, although there was a good tick up in the use of amenities in the purpose-built rentals as well, in particular in terms of how they're making decisions. Here you can see the bathroom figures, how urgent it is that people try and find more bathrooms than they currently have, and they're willing to pay more to get that in as well. You can see in terms of the bedrooms, an additional bedroom, and there's more drill down later on that, people are struggling to pay more for their unit period, but in particular for an additional bedroom. They were willing to pay more for a bathroom than they were for a bedroom. So here's your laundry information. 52% don't have an in-suite washroom and want it. So here we're talking about 80% of the market wants to have a washer and dryer in their unit, and the vast majority of those people don't. So something to take home and think about. So balconies, that's an interesting fun fact too. The interest and the acceptance of common area facilities in replacement for having them in your unit themselves is rising year over year. E-commerce is also rising year over year, and this is a place where I think that a modest improvement can make a big difference in terms of your tenant satisfaction. You can see that this is really age dependent. Young people are way heavier e-commerce users than older people, but there's a problem with how you deliver the packages, how you store them. These are simple things to solve, assuming that you have a little bit of juggling room in terms of the storage in the building. And addressing this is going to lead to a significant increase in your tenant satisfaction. The comfort level with things such as Amazon Key is dropping. We're seeing that across all age groups, but particularly for single women. Even people with pets, only a third of them felt comfortable with an Amazon Key solution. Again, the comfort level is greater for young people than for older people, but it's really not the solution to this situation. We have lots of mixed data and lots of variation by region in terms of how people technologically want to enter their own suite. And if you buy the survey, you can drill down for your region to see how these figures factor. I was surprised to see that 41% of people were okay with AI controls for your unit. Personally, I find Alexa creepy, but again, that ranges again with ages, and 41% of Canadians that were surveyed said that was fine. So electric vehicles is a transition that we all know is coming soon, but it's not penetrating the rental market in Canada today. In Vancouver, a significant number of units have electric car stations, and there's double the rate of electric car ownership in Vancouver than the rest of the country, but it's still not really a big factor in terms of how you're thinking about your parking. These numbers are decreasing year over year, and I think that's reflected in the affordability figures. Again, in-suite laundry got the top spot. Interestingly, parking, and we're going to drill down on that a little more detail later, was the next most important thing. And there are a couple of different ways to look at this. A designated parking spot people valued as much as a new building. So if you don't have designated parking spaces, this is an easy fix, low cost, big payback. On to smoking cannabis. So across the country as a whole, more than half of the people felt uncomfortable about people smoking marijuana in their common areas. Not so much for young people. When you flip to under 25, I'm going to go back here. Here's all respondents. Here's under 25. So we're starting to see a generational shift in terms of tolerant attitudes, and this one is one of two areas where it manifested most dramatically. So in general, Canadians do not want smoking in their buildings. In fact, there's a high percentage of people who will not rent in a building that permits smoking, and marijuana use, at least self-reported in these surveys, was very low. Airbnb. So we asked about short-term rentals, and here again you saw quite a significant age spread. And our guess is that this is a result of young people, if they're going to be out of town, they want to try and rent their units because they are squeezed for how they're going to make their rental payments on a monthly basis. Older renters really strongly prefer that short-term rentals not be permitted in their buildings. They're uncomfortable with the concept. So how are people making decisions? This looks exactly the same as prior years. Grocery store, number one thing, preferably walkable. It's an interesting fact. In the older age band, access to restaurants is taking over the fourth position. Reasons for renting versus owning. Again, this is age determinant. Older renters like the hassle-free lifestyle. Younger renters are largely saving for a down payment. Currently, monthly rents are going up. You can see that the shifts are gradual, but they're significant. Interestingly, the largest group of renters in Vancouver averaged at $1,650 a month. That's a pretty big number. Most common rent by city, these are pretty tightly clustered, to be honest. Although Ottawa surprised me as an outlier, that's been somewhat of a soft market in recent years, but it still had the highest preponderance rent number. The budget obviously is less than what people are currently paying. If people, again, are targeting about a third of their income, but they're being forced to pay more. This is a figure that we've been tracking the last few years, and it's going actually in the reverse direction. And I think that that's a result of getting more respondents from the rest of Canada, because it's one thing to live in a city that has good transit. It's another altogether to live in a rural area. People need their cars. So this shows up in the commute methods as well, that driving is ticking up as we get more representation out in the hinterland. And commute times are also ticking up. That is largely a result of traffic impaction, which is increasing everywhere. So consistent with the difficulty finding two-bedroom units and the difficulty with the price point, we're seeing people taking a little bit longer to find a rental unit, and people spending, or at least setting time aside to look for a unit, significantly increasing because there may be more apprehension about the market than reality. These figures are actually a little disappointing. They look just about exactly the same as last year in terms of people's satisfaction with the condition of their unit, so there's definitely room for improvement here. And interestingly, I found this fact on Google AI, that customer service experiences actually are the things that people read about when they go to look at customer survey responses. So we drilled down in this detail this year at a lot more granular level. So one of the sponsors had asked, they were curious about whether automated systems would be accepted by Canadian renters, and what the survey showed was that there was intense pushback against that. High level of comfort with having an on-site manager. People value them greatly. There's room for quality improvement, but people definitely want to have an on-site property manager and somebody they can go to if they have a problem and someone they can talk to if they have a question. 49% would pay more to have an on-site property manager. This is not like a marginal difference. This is a significant difference. So does the rental meet their needs, all of their needs? 62% said yes. The vast majority of the people who said no because they need more space. And a third of those would pay more in order to get more space. So we still need to shift the mix of units from 1 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms plus, because we have a growing number of families moving into apartment living in Canada. So here's the specific detail in terms of the bedrooms. And you can see that There are a lot of people who would pay for an extra unit, but they can't afford it. They want another bedroom, they want another bathroom. These are urgent requirements, but the amounts that people are able and willing to pay just don't add up to the math to provide the units. So we've got to come up with another way of doing that, whether it is zoning incentives or other types of mechanisms to close this gap between what people need and what the market is delivering. One of the solutions that has sometimes been bantered around, at least in academic circles, is co-living, like having a centralized kitchen and then more like a dorm for grown-ups. And you can do it in a multi-generational sense. There's a lot of different models that are being explored successfully in places like Scandinavia. Canadians just don't have their heads around that yet. Young people were more interested in learning more about that than their seniors, but 70% would not consider it as a pretty big number. So this is a premature concept. In most markets, I think we'll see a little bit of tinkering in this area, some experiments, and that may gradually increase the acceptance around this topic. We are finding people either discouraged or making a lifestyle choice to rent versus buy, but I think the consensus across the country is that people, if they can afford it, would prefer to own their own home, and they would prefer not to be in a co-living environment. So this was a fun fact. The Economist wrote an interesting article about China because, again, dealing with the affordability problem, the kitchen is a big portion of the cost, and Chinese renters seem to have more options and more flexibility in this regard. So, purchase plans. Across Canada, people are comfortable with where they are positioned. 40% of all Canadians who are renters said, yeah, that's fine, that's exactly what I want. I have no interest, no plans. It's actually 50 if you add the I have no interest and I have no plans. You can see the affordability issues showing up in the under 30 and in the Toronto market, even the under 40. So these are, we saw that 45% of all renters have pets. These are some fun pictures from some of our apartment communities in the United States. The programming around pets there has reached hysteria levels. They have Halloween parties for the pets. They have Fourth of July and St. Patrick's Day parties for the pets. It's a big part of community living, in particular in the South, in the U.S. And what we've found here in Canada is that people are not that focused on these kinds of frivolities. They're much more focused on hardcore essentials inside of their unit. Now, this is looking at under 25-year-old. I'll show the All Canada next. I think the younger residents really are focused on the affordability factor and getting those things that are essential for them to have at least a reasonable level of comfort in terms of their living arrangements. Not that different from the Canada-wide statistics. Interestingly, the designated parking spot pops up. I think that's because that's reflective of more parkers, balconies. That's a nice to have as opposed to a need to have, although across Canada, I think it is table stakes. What will they pay extra for? So, free guest parking, who'da thunk? That was something that on average in Canada, people said they would pay $20 a month for. They said it really irritates their guests, it irritates them, and they would rather have a charge at the community level and have the parking spaces provided for no charge. And then again, the washer dryer. The $15 a month for soundproof walls, microwaves, parking lots, stainless steel appliances, that's the same as prior years. It's actually the same exact number. The $18 a month designated parking space, there's another one that's low cost, high value. Not considered important, pet features. I think people aren't offering them, but in our statistics, people don't really care about that. They don't want to pay extra for it. They don't want to pay extra for valet. Like I said, back to basics. Obviously, children value toddler and family rooms and playground facilities, but those with a growing population of people with young children, this is going to become more important, but at present, it's only about 20% of the renter population. So we get a little bit different response when we look at essential plus nice to have. Abundant natural light and balconies are the ones that really pop up the list. Washer, dryer, and unit goes down because all things considered, it would be nice to have a unit that is really refreshing to come home to, but it's better, it's essential to have one that you can get your day-to-day activities taken care of on. Now this year we added a lot of programming questions. And this again was owner requested, and we were pretty surprised with the take-up. This was regular usage, which means more than 2 times per week that the residents are taking advantage of these amenities. And the big surprise here was tenant social events and cooking classes. Who'd have thunk that the kind of take-up for those types of activities would be so great, but they're extremely well received in the tenant community. This was my favorite chart in this year's presentation. On the left, you can see 21% of people say they never exercise, absolutely no way. And yet, only 7% of the people think it is not essential to have a gym in their rental apartment building. So I guess it's just this, I want to live in a place that people who come and visit me will think that I might work out in my lifetime. I'm not sure. But the figures show that people aspire to living in a healthy environment, and it's important, really important, to 44% of renters, most of whom are regular or at least occasional exercisers. On to technology. So in terms of service requests, people were highly satisfied or generally satisfied. Again, room for improvement, but this is not a problem. We are not seeing numbers where more than half of the people are saying, I make service requests and nothing ever happens. I was interested in the results here about change in management, that 14% of the people who had a change in management said that it was a negative change. That's kind of disappointing, but management matters. Tenants pay more attention to this than you think, and it's an easy fix with a little bit of care and tenderness. Communication methods. This is, again, a repeat of what we've seen in prior years. Landlords like to have more personal contact with the tenants. Tenants want more via email or text. They're not even that interested in phone calls. They really would like to see this get more automated. That doesn't mean they value the on-site property manager any less. They just want to communicate wherever they are, whenever they can. Finding rentals, this is stable. The online listing service has a share that doesn't seem to be like shooting up to 70%. It's still roughly a third of the way that people find. Most people find them through word of mouth and through identifying the building by driving around in the neighborhood that they want to live in. Kijiji looks like it's the winner here. We use Kijiji to recruit people to fill out the survey, in addition to having landlords post the access to the survey or distribute it to their tenants. Websites matter, although you'll see in the following charts and here that websites aren't determinant. They're need to have, not people aren't making decisions on the basis of websites, but they do make a positive impression. So this is another slide that is markedly different from what we see in the US markets. 70% of people said that they really didn't look for the reputation of the manager when they were making a decision. So I'd say as owners and operators, we have an opportunity here, which is an opportunity around branding and making people aware of the fact that brands matter, that brands have an opportunity to bring programming that smaller mom and pop shops can't. Mom and pop shops can offer a different kind of brand experience, which is that personal touch, but this is not an area where our markets are well developed. Payment technology, again, this is the same thing that we've seen in prior years, although surprisingly credit cards are still something that people really do want to use. I don't know if that's for air miles or why, but people want to use their credit cards, and the landlords are really cutting down on their acceptance of credit card payments as a method of payment. Community portals is something that's up. Last year we had 25%, 2 years ago it was 25%. Last year It was over 50 this year. It was 40. I think, again, that reflects the broadening of the survey respondent pool to more rural areas of the country. But I don't know that this is a particularly effective amenity. You see that the people, about 50% of the people say that it's not applicable or they wouldn't use it. About 40% said yes, they have one and they don't use it, or they have one and they use it. Those sort of evenly divided. So either we need to do a better job of these communication techniques, or this is not some place where you need to rush to make an investment. In general, people find that there is enough parking at their units, and there is a willingness in some places in the country for people to pay more. In places where there is excess parking, which is mainly in the center cities, this is a suggestion. We offered it last year, but I thought I'd bring an illustration today. This is an actual bike parking lot in the Netherlands. It's at the train station in Utrecht, and they actually house over 10,000 bikes in this garage. It's 7 stories tall, and it takes up a whole city block. So there's more bikes than people, they say, in the Netherlands, but I think that we have low bike adoption in Canada in part because we aren't providing secure and designated parking areas for our renters. I think it would be an interesting experiment to try. So this was the detail on guest parking. You can see that the overwhelming majority of people really don't like it. That was 77% of people said, let's get rid of this. So this is an easy fix as well. It does bring a little bit of cost attached to it, but again, given the overwhelming dislike for paid guest parking, this is something to seriously consider. Here's some good news. We've really turned the corner. When we started this survey, a third of respondents said they were willing to pay for their own utilities. They wanted it included in the rent for predictability. And now we're the other way around. We have 60% of people saying they would prefer to be individually metered for utilities. So given our push to green our buildings in the years ahead, and especially to meet our 2030 targets, this is again an easy fix. Individual metering is now the status quo in Canada, across the country. On to conclusions. So here's our big 6 or 5. How many is that? 6. Affordability, I've beat to a dead horse. Parking is still important, and there's a strong preference for free guest parking. People, just as a reminder, said they would pay $20 more per month to have free guest parking at their units. So that's going to be a quick offset. Programming is gaining traction. If that's not something you're doing in your units, you might be interested in learning a little more detail about how people are taking that up and how many days per week they're enjoying it. We also ask questions about whether people pay for that programming. There was few enough answers outside of the major cities that we didn't feature that in the presentation, but that detail's in the survey. E-commerce is an area that you need to pay attention to. There's obviously always room for improved services, but really those service levels have not been budging year over year in terms of these surveys, and the obvious more bedrooms and bathrooms. So the single largest data change was the increase in the number of respondents who are already in 2 bedrooms, and their big issue is they need more bathrooms. The households with dependents under 20 increased by 50% year over year, which again I think is reflective of an increase in the number of younger renters that we're reaching. So we always feature the low, medium, and high dollar value takeaways. That's the money conclusions out of the whole presentation. Here they are. The surprise ones are e-commerce package storing and delivery, and the designated parking or free guest parking features. Our biggest takeaway, the repeated sponsorships and rising response rates affirm that this survey has a high value both to the real estate community, hopefully to the government officials who might be in the audience paying attention to these things, for tweaking our zoning codes to help accommodate our needs more directly. So here's a list of the sample questions that changed as a result of sponsor input. You can see it's quite extensive, and when you do agree to sponsor, you're welcome to sit down with the survey and insert questions that really get at the answers you need, whether you're doing a redevelopment program, whether you're doing a new development program, or whether you're a government agency and trying to figure out what things you really want to incent people to do. The dashboard, as I mentioned on the front end, offers not just a lot of granularity, but you can also do benchmarking of your own portfolio. If you're a sponsor landlord, we can pull out of the sample your specific answers so you can find out what your tenant said about your service levels at the building level, at the market level, at the feature level in order to better hone your delivery to the marketplace. We can tailor the data to your needs. We can find out whatever you need to know about your sample population and about the benchmark broader population in the areas where you own units. Also, and this is a feature we added 2 years back, finding out how much tenants are willing to pay for those extra services that you might be considering as a part of your annual budget process. So, how do we do this? If you are interested in sponsoring, here's the person to contact, Sarah.segal at Informa. If you think that you might forget that information, leave your business card at the registration desk and they'll get it over to Sarah so that she can get you in the loop in terms of communications, review of the survey, and distribution. She starts this process generally in February. The collection process takes 3 to 4 months, and then the analysis process takes another couple of months. So we're just starting on the white paper that will summarize all of the key conclusions here. And if you want to get your hands on this year's and 2018 dashboard information, that's $5,000 charge. And again, you contact Informa; they supervise all of this stuff. So on behalf of our sponsors and Informa and Avison Young, I want to thank you all for sitting here through this entire data dump and also for increasing this participation year over year, because I think it adds a lot of value, not only to our community, but to the government agencies that are trying to facilitate the delivery of more appropriate, cost-effective housing solutions for our population. So how about we give each other a round of applause before we go for coffee? Thanks again.